Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Eran Zinman, and I work for a company called Conduit. And today, I'm going to talk about my real-life experience developing HTML5, native, and hybrid mobile apps. So, I mean, this issue has been debated many times in the past, and there's a lot of blogs and articles on the web discussing whether you should build your app with HTML5 or native. But today, I'm going to show my personal experience. In the past 2 years, I've been developing mobile apps using HTML5 technology and native technology, and I'm going to show my perspective as a developer and as a team leader using these technologies. So a little bit about myself before we begin. I really love and excited about everything mobile, HTML, and web. I was part of the founding team of Conduit Mobile. It's a business unit within Conduit. And today, I manage R&D in Conduit Mobile. So when you think about mobile development, you got three main strategies that you can use. One is using HTML5. You guys probably know all about HTML. And the main point here is basically you develop once, and you can deploy your code across all of the major platforms. The other way to develop mobile apps is using native code. This means that you need to use Objective-C for iPhone, Java for Android, C# for Windows Phone, and C++ for BlackBerry. And there are other platforms you can use with other programming languages. But essentially, this means that you need to recreate your app each and every time for each platform. You need to write your code once for Android, once for iPhone, redo the whole thing again and again for each of these platforms. And the last method of developing mobile apps is using the hybrid approach. This means that you develop part of your app using HTML5 and part of your app using native code. How much native and how much HTML, that's up to you. But you can combine these technologies and develop your mobile app using a combination of HTML and native code. Now, Simon from Facebook done a great warm-up for me. I'm going to show you a video of Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, talking about their transition from HTML to native. And that's a big shift because Facebook is the most popular app on iPhone and Android. The only difference is that I have many connections at Facebook, and I've got the actual video for Mark in Mark.
You know, there's no doubt that some of the stuff that we've had a bunch of missteps on this. You know, I mean, I think part of the first question that you asked me that didn't quite get to answering was, what are some of the big mistakes that we've made? And when I'm introspective about the last few years, I think that the biggest mistake that we made as a company is betting too much on HTML5 as opposed to native, because it just wasn't there, right? And
OK, so I left Mark there in a nice position. But I mean, overall, you get the picture. Mark is saying that HTML5 wasn't there, and they've done the transition to native code. Now, I mean, for me, looking at that video, that's quite amazing to see a public company CEO saying that choosing one technology over another had such a strategic impact on the company. So in my opinion, one of the main reasons is that HTML5 is more than a technology. It affects what your app looks like. It affects how your application behaves. And it affects how you build your organization. And we'll talk about Facebook later on. So again, I'm going to take you today throughout the journey that I personally experienced in the past 2 years. And in order to get you into the right context, I want to show you a quick demo of what we do in order for you to understand our product. So what we do is that we have a mobile app platform where you can create mobile apps. This is me, a video of myself, creating a mobile app for future web apps. I've just put in the URL. What we do now is that we crawl future web apps website, and we grab content. And as you can see, we created the mobile apps literally within seconds for future web apps. We've added their Facebook feed, Twitter feed. And the important stuff is that on the right, you see a real live simulator you can play with and it interact with like you were holding the iPhone device in your hands. You can change the design, add more content, and this is the product that we've created. And you can create almost any application that you want. And at the end, we produce a native app for you for iPhone, Android, and Windows Phone. So this is what we do. And I want to take you guys back 2 years ago when we first started, and start with chapter number 1, which I call the Big Bang, or how everything has really begun. So we sat down, and we knew that we wanted to create this mobile app platform. And we had a few product requirements. So we knew that we wanted to create a native app for iPhone, Android, and maybe other platforms. We knew that one of the products of our platform would be to create a mobile web app in HTML5. We also knew that we wanted to support a web simulator, like the one you just seen on the right-hand side, where whenever you make any change to your mobile app, you'll see it immediately inside the browser. And also, we started within a company, but we were like a small startup. So we knew that we needed to start with a small agile team of 1 or 2 developers in order to get started. So I had to choose what technology we're going to use in order to support all of that. And I mean, prior to that project, I've been literally developing each and every day using native code, developing iPhone apps using Objective-C. And the natural choice for me was to use native code for iPhone and Java for Android. But looking at all of these requirements, I had to choose to use HTML5. Because HTML5 enabled me to create a real cross-platform application, enabled me to create a mobile website, and enabled me to create that web simulator on our website with one code base in HTML5. And that was the perfect solution for us at that point of time. So like any developer starting with a new technology, you do a POC. So this is the first design that we've got from our designer. This is a genuine design. And we chose to use PhoneGap. It was version 0.7.1 at that time. And PhoneGap enabled us to pack the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS into a native app. We also used a library called JQTouch. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it. JQTouch enables you to do all kinds of animations and stuff that you would have done if you were developing a native app. Some of the stuff is like doing a transition just like that. Basically, it puts 2 HTML elements, and using CSS transition emulates that page transition between different pages. And these were the technologies that we chose, and our POC included design the app in HTML and CSS. That's a design that we've got. It was really easy to do that in HTML and CSS. That's one of the things that HTML and CSS really excels in. We also wanted to check that we can use native features. I mean, we didn't really need them at that time, but we want to make sure that we can use the phone camera, the phone vibration, and so on, and PhoneGap, enabled us to do so. And we wanted to check that we can connect to RESTful services. So we had our services team, and we use AJAX technology, XML HTTP request, in order to connect to our services. Everything was working. And we tested on iPhone and Android. And overall, it looked really, really good. I mean, you do want in HTML, and everything worked. The POC was really successful. And we went on and started using that technology. Problem started about 3 or 4 days after we began. And we realized that we shouldn't be, it's not so fast. I mean, it's not that easy to use the HTML technology. One of the first things that we found came from a relatively unexpected position. So this is the original design that we've got, and a few days later, our designer sent us an updated design using this small bar at the bottom. So immediately, my developer team created this HTML element. He used position fixed in order to place it at the bottom of the device. Everything worked when we tried it on desktop computer. But once we got it into an actual iPhone and Android device, surprisingly, we found that there's no support for position fixed or mobile. It was about 2 years ago. New iOS version now do support position fixed. It's not perfect. But anyway, if you use position fixed, you're not guaranteed to support all devices, especially on Android. So this means that you can't place fixed position elements within a mobile application, which is a bit crazy, because how would you create this navigation at the bottom without using position fixed using HTML? So like any other developer, the first thing that you do is you go to Google and search for how to put fixed position element in HTML. And all results led me to a nice library called iScroll. I went to iScroll website. It was version 3.7.1 at that time. And I remember myself wondering, why do you need 3 major versions just to get a basic thing like scrolling? And only later I found that it contained 11,000 lines of JavaScript code just to get scrolling right. So I looked through the code and found that, I mean, this guy is very talented, the guy that wrote that library. And you can see a video here on the right. And he basically recreated scrolling from scratch. He detected touch events and swipe. He calculated the momentum that you click on the device. He's done the bounce effect and the scroll bar on the right-hand side. And using CSS transitions, he done the animation inside the HTML page. So that's kind of crazy. And basically, he recreated scrolling using JavaScript just to enable us to put fixed position elements. But it worked quite well on our iPhone devices. And then we went on to check it on other platforms, such as Android and BlackBerry. And then we found that even though all browsers are based on WebKit, iPhone Safari, and Android browser, and BlackBerry as well, they have inconsistent experiences. So some of them have hardware acceleration, and some don't. Some are slow performance. Some have better performance. On some browsers, rendering breaks. And some have missing events, missing touch events or other events. And on some, there are memory problems, memory leaks and other memory problems. And you can see here an Android device. And this is me finger modeling here. And you can see me using iScroll on an Android device. And you can see how slow it is and how sluggish it is. And even that transition from one page to another, on the way back, it just waits for like half a second before it goes back fully. So this is the experience that we had on Android and on BlackBerry. And you know, it wasn't perfect, but we were really keen to get our alpha version out. So we went along with it and released the first version. And if I summarize our first chapter, and you're going to see these charts throughout my presentation, it basically shows how much effort we put into HTML5 and how much effort we put into native. So at that stage, everything was HTML5, one code base. We didn't write anything in native code. And we also added BlackBerry as a platform, like literally 3 or 4 days before we launched. It was that easy. We just used PhoneGap. We packed the same HTML code. We added BlackBerry. And our first release contained a native version of iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry, all using the same source code using HTML5. And obviously, the good part was that we've been doing real cross-platform development. Whenever we added a new feature, or whenever we fixed a bug, everything immediately reflected into all of these platforms. It was really easy to add new features. It was really easy to add a new platform. We just added BlackBerry a few days before we launched. And we could do everything with only 2 developers, which is a bit crazy. The bad part was that we had bad performance on Android. We had bad performance on BlackBerry. And we also had to use the same user interface for all platforms. So that, in a way, summarized chapter number 1. We launched the product into an alpha version. People started creating mobile apps through our platform. And immediately we sat down and went on to chapter number 2 in order to improve Android performance. So, as I've mentioned, the first problem that we had with Android was slow scrolling performance. Our entire Android application was one big web view. And we thought, what's the best way to improve the scrolling performance on Android? So, you can't do much with HTML and CSS because, you are limited inside the browser. We try to optimize iScroll and do all kinds of other stuff, but, as Mark said, it just wasn't there. So instead, we tried to eliminate the problem by splitting our mobile application into native components and web components. So what would happen was that the header was made using native UI. The footer navigation footer was made using native UI. And we reduced the size of the web view within these two elements. And then we didn't need to use iScroll because we could just display everything in the browser and do scrolling within the browser. But that meant that we needed to create a two-way bridge because whenever the web view started, JavaScript would run, and then would send information to the native code because it needed to tell the native code how to render the header and the footer. But then, once the header and the footer were rendered and displayed, the native code had to send information to JavaScript again, because whenever a user clicked on any of these items at the bottom, you had to tell the web view to change the page. So we created that two-way bridge for the web view to communicate with the native and for the native to communicate with the JavaScript. And it worked quite well, and that improved the scrolling performance a lot. The other problem we had was with the slow page transition, doing a transition between different pages. So what we've done here, which is a bit crazy, I mean, thinking about it now, is that whenever you clicked on an item, it will send command to native code. Native code would then take a screenshot of the web view, display the screenshot over the web view, move the web view to the side, change the contents of the web view, and then slide it back again using native code. All this crazy stuff in native code just because we couldn't do that simple transition using HTML and CSS. That's one of the main problems when you develop inside the web view. Sometimes you just hit a glass ceiling, and there's nothing you can do except going to native code and try to solve the problem. But overall, it solved both of our problems. And Android obviously moved a bit to the native side because we had to get another developer on board to maintain the Java code and all. And obviously the good part was that we had a good experience on Android and iPhone. We still had bad performance on BlackBerry. We had some spaghetti code because we need to use different JavaScript code in order to create a navigation on iPhone and Android and the page transitions. And we need to get another developer on board, a special guy to do all the Android stuff. So that's the end of chapter number 2. So that was about 3 or 4 months after we launched. And then we went on and found a new promising platform called Windows Phone. So that's chapter number 3, which I call the era of the Windows Phone. And I remember myself getting the first Windows Phone device to my hands. And when I look at it, the first thing I've noticed is that it had a very unique user experience. It had like a big portrait image at the back, and you could slide between the pages. And whenever you clicked on an item, it will flip the page and go and show the information. And I remember that I held the device, and I thought, how am I going to use CSS transitions and HTML in order to do so? I mean, obviously, what we've done on iPhone and Android is to mimic native behavior. How am I going to do that on Windows Phone? But only then it struck me that not only that I need to do it in HTML and CSS, I need to do it with that browser. And not only that, it's this browser. Surprisingly, I found that it's version 7. How do you do these things using IE7? And that's unbelievable. There's no HTML and CSS support. There's no hardware acceleration. There's no touch events. How am I going to do that? So, I mean, immediately we understood that we need to change our approach. And what we've done, I mean, regardless of Windows Phone, the first thing we've done is to start using Backbone. And Backbone, you guys probably know Backbone. It's like an MVC platform framework for JavaScript. And we use Backbone to separate our data modules and business logic, which was written in JavaScript, from our views, which was written in HTML and CSS. So we split the code, and again, we use HTML and CSS for iPhone and Android. But what we've done for Windows Phone was kind of unique, because using Backbone, we created specific views for Windows Phone, which communicated with the native code, and we wrote the entire Windows Phone user interface using C# and XAML. So JavaScript will launch, will do all the business logic calculations, and then send information to the native code. Native code would draw the UI using C#, and then whenever you clicked on an item, native code would send event back to JavaScript, and so on. And basically, it's like an MVC platform where the view is written in a different language on a different platform, which is a bit crazy, but it worked. And that enabled us to use the same code base in JavaScript for Windows Phone. So again, summarize this chapter. At that point, we decided to drop BlackBerry, and we went on with Windows Phone. And obviously, it went whole way towards native code. We had to write the entire user interface using native. We had a good experience on Windows Phone. And obviously, the bad part was that for the first time, I really felt the pains of doing cross-platform development. Up until then, whenever we developed a new feature, everything worked across all devices. But now, when we added a new feature, we needed to get the Windows Phone guy to recreate it for Windows Phone. Even though it was only limited to the user interface, we still needed to do so. And I remember myself wondering what would happen if we started with native code for each platform. That would mean that every time we develop a new feature, we had to straighten the line between each and every platform. And we needed to get another developer on board to do the Windows Phone stuff. So that's the end of chapter number 3, and which leads me to chapter number 4, which is what we do now. This is a current project that runs inside our business unit. So we really like what we've done on Windows Phone, and we decided to use the same solution for other platforms. So we created the core using JavaScript, which contains everything which is not user interface related. And then what we're doing now is that we recreate the user interface in native code for each platform. And obviously, we still use HTML and CSS for a mobile website. So we have one core and different user interfaces on each native platform. And if I summarize, in a way, predicting the future, so we're going to straighten the line between all these platforms. We're going to have a smooth user experience because, obviously, we're using native code. And the bad part's going to be that we're going to need a big team because we're going to need a developer or a few developers for each platform. It's going to be harder to add new features, and we're going to have platform-specific bugs. So that's chapter number 4. And before we summarize the whole process that we had, I want us to have a quick look on what are the big players are doing. So I took the liberty to analyze quickly what Facebook and LinkedIn are doing in that sense. So LinkedIn got a mobile app for HTML5, Android, iPad, and iPhone. And in my opinion, LinkedIn is one of the best hybrid HTML and native apps out there. I mean, they're really doing something right. They do a combination of native and HTML5 user interface. So some of the screens are rendered using native code, and some of the screens are rendered using HTML. They made that distinction between pages which contains small amount of content, which are done in HTML5, and pages that require a lot of scrolling and using big images are being done in native code. I've actually unpacked LinkedIn mobile app and unminified the JavaScript, and they got a lot of JavaScript and HTML and CSS inside their mobile app. And I really suggest you guys to have a look. And they got a great engineering blog, which they document everything they do on iPad and iPhone. And I really recommend you guys to check it out. And if I use the same chart, I would position LinkedIn somewhere in the middle. So they do a combination of JavaScript and HTML. And some of the UI is native, some is HTML. But most of the logic is being done in HTML in LinkedIn case. Let's talk a bit about Facebook. So Facebook got a mobile app for HTML5, Android, iPad, iPhone, and Windows Phone. And one of the first things that you used to notice, is that whenever you open the device, you would see that screen showing loading. That's mainly because in the previous version of Facebook for iPhone, Facebook app would ask the server to serve the HTML and CSS and JavaScript dynamically whenever you started the app. It worked in a way like a browser. It didn't have a lot of HTML and CSS and JavaScript stored inside the device itself. And Facebook made a really interesting transition. I mean, if you guys recall, a few years ago, when they first launched, they had a native version. And then they moved to HTML, and now they're doing the transition again back to native just a month ago. So it's really interesting to see what Facebook are doing in that sense. They use the same code. They used to use the same code for web and native. And as Simon mentioned, they got some bad reviews about the speed of the application. And as far as I know, Android is next to move to native user interface. And again, if I use the same chart, so when they launched the first version of their application, it was fully native. And then they launched the Android version, and they used the same code in a way for iPhone and Android, which was the previous version. Windows Phone was fully native all the way. And now they moved iPhone to be native, fully native, and Android is soon to follow. So if I summarize, I would say that HTML and native debate, it's not just about technology. It's also dependent on how big is your team, what technology you're using for your other products. And always remember that you can iterate and make changes along the way. I mean, we had some issues in the past, and OS progresses, browsers progress, and some of the things that we didn't have, we couldn't cope with in the past, we can do now. And always don't be afraid to make changes and admit you were wrong. I mean, we were wrong about certain stuff, and we make changes along the way. And just to balance things up, because I'm a big fan of HTML5, and you saw Mark's video, the one I began with. So let's see what Mark had to say right after that first video.
Right, and it's not that HTML5 is bad. I'm long-term really excited about it. And and one of the things that's interesting is we actually have more people on a daily basis using mobile web Facebook than we have using our iOS or Android apps combined, right? So mobile web is a big thing for us. But
again, leaving Mark in a flattering position, but that's a big statement. I mean, and I support it as well. I mean, HTML is big. Even though we've done a transition from native, from HTML to native in a way, in some of our code, we are still a big believer in HTML5. So thank you very much. And you're welcome to contact me on Twitter and my email address. I don't know if we have any time for questions. Any questions?